With the introduction of the revolutionary Greyhound ocean liners Lusitania and Mauretania, Cunard established itself on the forefront of transatlantic travel. For all their speed, though, Lusitania and Mauretania alone could not maintain weekly service between Liverpool and New York, the premier route across the Atlantic. This was due, in part, to the lengthy and laborious turnaround process at the end of each voyage, which required nearly a week, or about the same amount of time as a one-way crossing. There is a video on my channel about the coaling process, which was the limiting factor in quickly turning around a ship. For the time being, Cunard was making do with Campania picking up the third leg. She was an old speedster, but not up to par in terms of passenger capacity or comfort. But this arrangement would not do. So, in order to establish a premier weekly transatlantic service between the UK and New York, a sort of holy grail of early 20th century shipping, Cunard needed a third express liner to join Lusitania and Mauretania. And so, in September 1910, Cunard invited three shipbuilders, Swan, Hunter, and Wigham Richardson, John Brown and Company, and Vickers, Son, and Maxim, to submit bids for their new ship. The new ship would be nothing like her predecessors Lusitania and Mauretania, and would be built with a totally different design philosophy. While the speed of these two ships was triumphant and had its place, it also had considerable drawbacks, namely that they were expensive to build, expensive to operate, were prone to vibration, and were limiting to passenger comfort. Lusitania and Mauretania were built for speed, for good reasons, and you can learn more about those reasons in my video on Lusitania and Mauretania. But that strategy would not work for the new ship. Instead, the new ship would be larger, wider, slower, and more spacious. In a sense, it would be like the upcoming White Star ships Olympic and Titanic, at least in principle. The important thing was that it would be fast enough to keep up with her running mates, and comfortable enough so not to serve as a disappointment to passengers who, because of timing, had to cross on this new ship rather than the glamorous Lusitania or Mauretania. Balance among the running mates was very important. Ultimately, the contract was awarded to John Brown and Company at the start of 1911, which had submitted a bid to Cunard for £1.41 million. Unlike Lusitania and Mauretania, the new ship, which would be named Aquitania, would be built on a fixed budget, as opposed to the cost-plus profit model. For comparison, most ships built by Harland and Wolff for White Star Line were built on cost-plus. While Cunard was doing well financially during this time, the cost of the new ship was important because the company would not receive an operating subsidy from the British government once the ship was in service, as it did for Lusitania and Mauretania. In terms of size, Aquitania would be very similar to her would-be rivals Olympic and Titanic. In fact, in terms of gross register tonnage, the standard way to measure the size of a passenger ship, Aquitania was almost exactly the same size as Olympic. Olympic was about 300 tons short of Aquitania's 45,600. Aquitania was to be faster than the Olympic-class ships, though, because Cunard wanted a ship with a maximum speed of no less than 23 knots. Aquitania would be quite different both in design and outward appearance from Lusitania and Mauretania. Gone was the sleek, yacht-like profile, replaced with the higher and boxier superstructure. The beautiful and stately curved forward superstructure of Lusitania and Mauretania were cast aside in favor of space. Aquitania's design did incorporate a very slight curve to her forward superstructure, but it was so slight that a casual onlooker would probably miss it altogether. Although she was to be distinctly a Cunard ship, her proportions would strongly resemble those of Olympic and Titanic. Massive as she was, Aquitania erred on the side of tradition in many ways. For example, she would be equipped with 4 funnels, even though she did not necessarily need to be, and instead of the more modern and frankly superior Welland-type lifeboat davits used aboard Olympic and Titanic, she was to be equipped with the standard bent-arm type davits. While she was under construction, Cunard and John Brown and Company kept their new ship hidden behind a veil of secrecy. This was an era of intense competition on the Atlantic. During the construction, one of her would-be rivals, Titanic, sank on her maiden voyage. This inevitably led to the strengthening of standards for ships just like Aquitania. Luckily, Aquitania was designed for safety, and the additional Board of Trade requirements for watertight subdivision following the Titanic disaster were only a small inconvenience to Cunard, which only needed to spend an additional £7,000 to make the necessary changes. As the new ship neared completion, the launch date was finally scheduled for April 21st, 1913, less than 2 years after the keel was laid down. Lady Alice Stanley, Countess of Derby, was asked to ceremoniously launch Britain's newest and grandest express liner. When the day finally came, more than 100,000 people showed up for the launch ceremony. Launches were always a popular spectacle, and it was reported that some people even spent the night prior camped out to secure the best spot for viewing the launch. After the bottle of wine smashed against the hull and the ship slid majestically into the Clyde River, some 1,400 tons of chain brought the incomplete behemoth to a stop. Aquitania's fitting out was not as smooth as her land-based construction, though. The ship was originally scheduled to be delivered to Cunard by the end of November, just 7 months after her launch, but multiple labor disputes ensured that this deadline would not be met. As the delays racked up and the original delivery date came and went, the likelihood that Aquitania's May 30th, 1914 maiden voyage would be cancelled seemed to be increasing. As May arrived, entire sections of the passenger accommodations in every class were so behind schedule that it would have taken a minor miracle for the ship to be ready for the May 30th voyage. But somehow, she left the John Brown shipyard on May 10th to the cheers of crowds numbering anywhere between 100,000 and 600,000. Aquitania was already beloved by the public. The sea trials began on May 12th, but only lasted 2 days. They were a bit rushed due to the looming maiden voyage, but she was thoroughly tested. After all, she represented a gigantic investment by Cunard, and it was important to be sure that they got what they ordered. Partly due to her modest speed relative to Lusitania and Mauretania, although Aquitania was certainly no slouch in the speed department, she proved to be almost entirely free from vibration at the outset. This would have been a relief due to the expense, time, and uncertainty of correcting severe vibration issues on other ships, including Lusitania and Mauretania. With the sea trials completed, Cunard formally accepted Aquitania on May 18, 1914. The final cost was somewhat higher than the initial budget, at £1.68 million, compared with the original £1.41 million. But Cunard's recent financial success allowed for them to pay for the ship without any assistance. A small miracle had occurred, and Aquitania would be ready for the May 30th maiden voyage. On May 29th, the ship was opened to public inspection at Liverpool, and guests flooded aboard. Sometime during the day, though, the terrible news of the sinking of Empress of Ireland reached Britain. The Canadian Pacific liner had been rammed and sunk in the St. Lawrence River in the early hours of that morning, causing the loss of more than 1,000 lives, many of them British. There's a video on my channel about the sinking of Empress of Ireland, and I encourage you to check it out if you have not done so already, as it is a fascinating and tragic story. Of course, the start of Aquitania's maiden voyage the very next day was marred with sadness and anxiety. The first couple of days of that maiden voyage were a bit gloomy, but after a few days, Aquitania finally cheered everyone up. Under the command of Cunard's Commodore, Captain William Turner, Aquitania's performance was remarkable, achieving daily average speeds of more than 24 knots, more than once during the voyage. As for the comfort she offered her passengers, well, I'll let Kipfer Fox of the Fox-Star line take you through her interiors.
Let's start in the first class lounge, also known as the Palladinian Lounge, due to its Georgian architecture, which is strongly influenced by Palladianism. Located on the A deck, the lounge was meant to be a social hub for first-class passengers, for both men and women. In the center was a lavish sitting area whose ceiling extended upward and jutted up through the boat deck in the form of a deckhouse. This allowed for additional windows to enhance the atmosphere and let plenty of natural light in. On one end of the room was an oak floor for dancing, and the other end featured a beautiful fireplace. The lounge was flanked on both sides by 2 separate garden lounges. Originally, one side was designated as a smoking and the other was non-smoking, but the non-smoking side was later changed to allow smoking. Moving aft on A deck, down the iconic so-called long gallery, we come to the first-class smoke room. This room was more subdued and masculine than the lounge, as it was intended for gentlemen only. Like the lounge, though, its ornate ceiling was high and extended through the boat deck. Smaller alcoves branched off from the main area for more private gatherings. The first-class dining saloon was located on D-deck. It was of the less preferred single-deck style, as opposed to the two-deck saloons seen on the earlier Lusitania and the Mauretania. However, Aquitania's designers clearly disguised the fact by opening the salon up to C-deck above. Although the C-deck area did not have seating, it would have made room and feel more open and airy. First class had an alternative dining option just aft of the main dining saloon, the grill room. It was very similar to the first class dining saloon aboard the Olympic and the Titanic. Meals in the grill room were included in the price of ticket and served as a second option for passengers. The B-deck promenade featured a raised section inboard, allowing passengers to relax in deck chairs to enjoy the view outside the windows. It also allowed for windows to the deck below for more natural light. The cabins in first class were comfortable and well decorated. Launched just 2 years after Titanic, Aquitania's swimming pool, located on E-deck, was quite an upgrade from the pool of the Olympic class liner. If Aquitania's first class spaces made her passengers forget they were on a ship, the second class spaces would have served as a reminder. Still, they were all very nice and featured its own gymnasium, an amenity often reserved for only first class passengers on other ships. The second class was largely confined to a superstructure island towards the stern. The smoking room below on B-deck even included high ceilings with similar windows to first class, to let natural light in from the deck above. Forward of the smoking room was a drawing room, featured a grand piano and skylights above. Natural light was abundant aboard the Aquitania. The dining saloon was reminiscent of the first-class dining saloon aboard the Olympic-class ships. As for third class, this is where Aquitania saw the least improvements on earlier ships, and featured no major upgrades as it was designed to cater to the same wave of immigrants as Lusitania and Mauretania and other ships, for example, at that time.
At last, Cunard had its premier 3-ship weekly service between Liverpool and New York. The ships were all grand, popular, and reliable. It was a balanced trio. And to top it all off, Cunard was the first to achieve this elusive feat. But this would not be an ocean liner history video if a wrench didn't get thrown into the gears at some point, and alas, World War I put a pause on Cunard's dominant money-making operation.